Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Rethinking, for those who are with us this morning. Today, we're talking about bus and rail devolution. Last year on my podcast, I spoke to Tom Forth, who many of you will have read his work, on his essay, Why the North is Poor. And I asked him when it all started to go wrong for the North. And I wasn't expecting his answer. And his answer was 1922, when the railways were grouped and the HQ of every rail operator moved to London. 64 years later, bus deregulation resulted in the North losing control of its bus services, and we started a 40-year period in which local towns and cities around the country had no control over their own transport networks. We're starting to reverse that process now. To introduce that topic, Ben from KPMG, please say a few words.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Thomas, and thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon, which for what I hope will be a very interesting and engaging topic. We've certainly got an epic lineup of speakers and panelists today. So my name is Ben Folser. I'm a partner in KPMG's transport practice, and I lead part of the transport practice that helps clients deliver complex, novel, and sustainable transport solutions. But I'm also responsible for coordinating our engagement with and across local authorities and lead our work on bus reform. So I thought I'd just set the scene by looking at kind of rail reform. Where are we? Where might we go? Where are we with bus reform? And then also, what's the future for different structures and authorities and governance in the sector, and how might that influence where we go in the devolution agenda? So, rail reform, let's start there. Key question, is Manchester the terminus or the starting point for rail reform? The English Devolution White Paper confirmed the government's commitment to allowing mayoral strategic authorities to apply for full statutory and financial responsibility for local rail services, infrastructure and or control of stations, but specifically says where that accelerates improvements for passengers and supports a more integrated network. And MSAs can seek full devolution of rail responsibilities, and have been able to since legislation such as the Railways Act 1993 and Transport Works Act 1992. But the 2024 Passenger Rail Services Public Ownership Act and the Railways Bill really strengthened this and requires partnerships between GBR and MSAs, and for GBR to have regard to transport plans and strategies of devolved governments. Now, the Centre for Cities estimates that integrating existing big city networks, including rail powers, would better connect 1.2 million people in the 6 largest English cities outside London by public transport, and potentially provide an extra 17 billion in economic benefits per year. We've already seen Merseyrail, London Overground and the Elizabeth Line as examples of devolved services with different levels of responsibility between the MSA and Network Rail on infrastructure management. But Manchester's obviously taken a significant stride, which Vernon will no doubt talk about when he talks about the experience here. And as of December this year, we'll start to see the first of those coming back into the B network. Meanwhile, Steve Rotherham said yesterday, I think many people will hear this, that from July 2028, there's an ambition to bring Merseyrail back into public control fully. And the Mayor of London's already said a number of times we would like more suburban rail services. Helpfully, I think about 2 months ago, the UTG and DFTO and GBR came together and published a practitioner's guide on what the models of devolution could look like. And it looks at everything from sort of more collaboration, local commissioning, all the way through to full devolution. I'm sure Alex will touch on this when he speaks as well. The decision on where the MSAs want to be in this model will be driven by a huge number of factors, including the nature of the rail infrastructure and services. Birmingham's a very, very different market to London and to Manchester, for example. Cost, competency, and even politics. The one thing that's really, really clear with the rail devolution agenda is we will start seeing a lot closer collaboration between GBR and the MSAs. Turning to bus, most people will be familiar that the 2017 Act, Bus Services Act, set us on the pathway towards bus reform and franchising. But the Bus Services Number 2 bill, issued last year, simplified the franchising process and provides more options, including municipal bus operators. It also includes a lot more responsibilities, including safeguarding, mandatory training, and improving transparency of service performance. Now, whilst that full franchising has been selected by Greater Manchester, Liverpool, South and West Yorkshire, including revenue risk sitting with the authority, that's not necessarily the model we're going to see across the country. And some people will choose to extend their enhanced partnerships, and some people might go for very different models in the franchising, sort of light franchising, more revenue risk with the operators. And I think that's right. We should have a mixed model. And it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of the back of the DFT Rural Bus Franchising Pilot Programme. But one thing is clear. Buses carry 10 million people a year. They deliver £11 billion a year for the economy. And they all feature prominently as part of local transport plans. But despite this, save a few examples around the country, most of the bus markets are in decline. And seeing declining patronage. And we must do everything we possibly can to reverse that, to safeguard the sustainability of this really important sector. And I think my experience of this from working across a number of authorities is that we typically look at improving integration as a core focus of that. But actually, that is important. The reality is that really hard policy choices need to be made and investments need to be made to turn the dial. That means significantly increasing the speed of buses in cities, reducing peak vehicle requirement, improving service reliability and performance, and delivering a fundamentally improved end-to-end journey. The aim should not just be around safeguarding and stopping decline of patronage, but actually getting more bums on seats, turning to new customer groups, actually achieving modal shift. Schemes that don't do that will likely stagnate and probably fail. So it's really critical we do that, and the B Network's a great example of where you've been able to do that, and I think it's fantastic that a lot of learning points from that. And the other consideration is delivering these sort of schemes, whether that be rail devolution or bus devolution, is not just a case of contracting or improving where you've done secured services in the past. They are full-scale transformations, and Anne-Marie's got a lot of examples of experience of doing that here in Manchester and now helping other authorities. They will require new competencies, new capabilities, and they will require you to really think about being a commercial business, a revenue business. I mentioned this to a colleague the other day at a combined authority and said, you will be responsible for over £250 million a year of revenue and cost. And if you can't square that circle, or square the square, circle the circle, then this is a problem, actually a financial problem for the authority. So I just wanted to finish off with just a few thoughts as well around the evolving role of mayoral strategic authorities and how that differs when you're outside of mayoral strategic authorities. So I think MSCs have a really significant role to deliver in delivering transport outcomes. And it extends way beyond rail and bus market reform into delivering fully integrated transport networks, taking more responsibilities for highways management, and certainly what we've seen in the English Devolution White Paper is a really good lead towards that, will not only help improve joined-up decision-making, but improve network performance, streamline planning and delivery of highway schemes, and potentially even improve the way that we're actually delivering new schemes where there's opportunities to do so. Integrated settlements have the ability to transform the relationship between transport, housing, and skills, making those codependencies much clearer and improving decision-making. And then when combined with local government reform and consolidation or aggregation of responsibilities, we've got many more opportunities, including things like centralised coordination of SEND, health, and community transport budgets, which also potentially support bus franchising. Regional transport partnerships, and Andy from Transport East is a very helpful representative on the panel here, are incredibly important, and they represent large parts of the country that are not covered by MSAs, where we require coordination strategy, planning, and or delivery of transport networks. And this could even extend in some cases to some form of statutory authority that can deliver cross-boundary and pan-regional schemes and achieve economies of scale that constituent local authorities can't. Now, we know that the future role of subnational transport bodies is being considered by DfT and the STB partners at the moment. Some may no longer be required as MSAs are stood up and LGRs delivered in their region, but I think there is a real role for some to continue existing and playing a really valuable part. The final comment I wanted to make was a reflection on some work we did with the then M8 back in 2019, looking at what powers had been devolved, what powers could be devolved, and how authorities were actually using those. And what we found was that whilst authorities consistently asked for more powers to be devolved to them, even back in 2019, they didn't have the capability and the competence to fully use the ones that had already been devolved to them. And so there's a real need to make sure, and it goes back to my point on transformation, that you don't just see these pieces as getting more control, but actually putting in place the competence and the capabilities to use that control to effect. So I hope that helps set the scene, Thomas, and very much over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's swap seats. Wonderful. So, we're in the rethinking work stream, so we always have a tendency in this country to sort of take incremental steps from where we are, but let's try and visualize where we want to be. Vernon, you're responsible for 2 of the most well-developed, devolved markets in the country. Roll forward 10, 15 years, where would you like devolution in Manchester and Wales, and probably particularly rail, which is the one that is least advanced at the moment, to have reached by that point?
I think where we'd want to get to is where the railway is clearly serving the broader outcomes that Greater Manchester or Wales are looking for, because I think as Ben said, transport isn't an end in itself. It's to enable economic growth, reduce the productivity gap, and open up opportunities. And those of you that have spent a few days in Manchester will see all the cranes. And if you've been around any of the boroughs, it's not just Salford and central Manchester where that's happening. So I guess we'd want a railway which clearly is serving all of those outcomes. And I think we'll get there. I think what we're doing under rail reform, you mentioned us bringing, or Ben mentioned us bringing rail into the B network. We won't be the contracting authority. We chose, working with Alex and his people, not to hang about for the passage of the bill or anything like that, but to crack on and start looking at things from a customer's point of view. And we all know, don't we, what customers want? Simplicity, remove those barriers to using public transport, provide a sensible and accessible alternative to using their car. This region is the fastest growing region in the country. It cannot be built on more vehicular journeys. It must be built on more active travel and more public transport. So I think when we look back in 10 years' time, Thomas, people will no longer be talking in future tense about integrated public transport and active travel networks, because they'll be all around the great cities of this country.
That's wonderful, thank you. Now, Andrew, you're at the opposite end of the spectrum. You know, Vernon's leading 2 of the organisations with the most advanced devolution settlements. You've got a variety of towns, cities, and villages in counties that often haven't gone, even taken the first step on the journey towards building the capability. Where do you want to and expect to be in 10 to 15 years' time?
In 10 to 15 years' time, I guess zooming out, we want the East's economy to have fulfilled its potential with supporting national productivity and supporting the huge amount of growth that we're taking in the East. So 500,000 new homes to 2050. From a national potential, we're building the power stations and the offshore that's going to power the UK. And we have the ports that trade with the world. And we need a rail system that delivers against those outcomes. In the East at the minute, it is a little bit messy. So we were going to have sort of mayoral elections in May this year. That's now been delayed 2 years to 2028. At the same time, local government reform will transform the nature of our local authorities, and local elections are about to take place in May as well that weren't originally going to. So there is a huge amount of disruption and uncertainty. However, in the long run, the aspiration is certainly amongst our leaders for the rail network to play a full role in delivering against those outcomes. Now that starts over the next 2 years, and I think those that are here taking the onus on working with GBR and the integrated Anglia Rail unit that has now formed. Both of the core rail operators, Greater Anglia and C2C, were amongst the first to nationalise. There's a really coherent Anglia Rail unit that's now formed. So we have the foundations there to build that, and I'd like to see over the next 2 years the foundations of that partnership form to support those mayors on day one when they come in, and then we can really motor from there in the following 8 to 10 years to really have that rail network that supports the economic outcomes that ultimately we're aiming for.
Alex, coming back to Tom's point that I quoted at the beginning, 1922 was when it all started to go wrong. The kind of pragmatic deal that you've done with Vernon to say we don't even need to wait for GBR, we can just get on and do devolution now. I almost have this fear that it's easier for you to do that now than when GBR exists, because I have this suspicion that GBR will become a command and control monolith, because that's what the railway always wants to do with itself, unless it pushes very hard in the other direction. By the time organisations, strategic authorities in Andrew's world are up to the level of capability and desire for devolution, do you think the door will be as open as it is now?
So I think you're wrong on Great British Railway.
I'm glad to hear it. I like being wrong.
I spend a lot of time in meetings talking about Great British Railways and how it's going to work. And the people in that room are always absolutely passionate about devolution. And the reason why we're passionate about devolution is because we're passionate about service. And the decisions which affect the service should be made closest to the customer as possible. And therefore, Great British Railways will be a highly devolved organisation. And at the heart of Great British Railways will, as Andy said, these integrated railways with local leadership, where we've integrated track and train, so we've stopped the blame factory. And also, under public ownership, one of the many benefits is train operating companies don't have end dates. And so we're saying to our integrated railways, this is your railway. It's your job to work with stakeholders and mayoral partners in your patch. What would it look like in 2050 if it was your own business? Dare to dream. And therefore, we're going to prove you wrong on Great British Railways. But I think it starts with this pride in service. And, at the moment, we know that in some parts of the country, the service we provide to our customers is not good enough. Now, the good news is it's getting better. And it's getting better strongly now, which is great. But in England, the further north you get from England, from London, I should say, generally, the worse the service gets, particularly on cancellations. And one of the things which is going to align Great British Railways and the mayoral partnerships is an obsession with service. That's where it starts.
Anne-Marie, obsession with service requires strong capability. You've obviously been through the process of building capability within Greater Manchester for the very first step that was set with devolution, which is buses in Manchester. What can you bring from your experience of what needs to be done to enable this to work across the country in every mode?
Well, I think, first of all, this interchange shows that there's a lot of capability in the UK. I think the challenge that authorities have got to go through is working out where they want to get to, but actually starting where they are now. And, Manchester's, obviously been an amazing feat, but each authority and each devolved authority or local authority needs to take the journey at their pace, if that makes sense. So there's got to be an ambition, but they've got to recognise the capability of where they are now and where they've got to. So Manchester as a combined authority was, as a mature authority, Transport for Greater Manchester was a reasonably mature organisation, and yet we had to go through quite a considerable skills and capability uplift and capacity to move us to bring in the skills internally. Other authorities aren't the same; they're not as, and so they've got to take their journey, whether that's franchising or rail, at a pace in which that they can take control of the elements that they've got the capability for. I think what's going on, however, is we've got a significantly high youth unemployment. We've got university graduates, struggling to get into employment, and I think the benefit of what we're doing in transformation, if I look at it purely from a skills and capability perspective, is we've got a huge benefit if we open our doors up to, necessarily non-transport people to come into the industry to build capability, whether that's commercial, brand, marketing, ticketing technology, AI. If we open our doors up on this journey, we can bring them skills in and, hopefully create a platform to reduce that unemployment and focus on technical skills that, will help the next generation, really. So I think it's got opportunity beyond transport for our UK-wide capability and our employment, really.
Bruce, one thing that strikes me looking at Scotland, and I think there's really important lessons here as England goes down the devolution journey. If you look at Strathclyde, it probably had more control of its rail network 40 years ago than it does now, partly because devolution has devolved power to Scotland, but actually that power is centralised within the devolved administration in Scotland. So what are the lessons from Scotland around the control of places within devolved regions and the level of control they might wish to have over their transport networks?
Yeah, thanks Thomas, and I'm the outlier in the panel today in terms of being from Scotland, a whole different ball game up there. I think it's really interesting the lessons that were learned from the kind of those Strathclyde days and the Strathclyde PTE days when we were co-signatory to the rail franchise. A lot got done. The biggest suburban rail network outside London. Some great projects taken forward in the 70s and 80s, and decisions were made over the piece to not pursue that. The current model has delivered as well. Transport Scotland in terms of the RTPs. I think the thing for me, it's really interesting coming to interchange and the position that we're in at the moment in Scotland and learning the lessons from what's going on in the regions down south in England. A lot for us to learn in terms of bus reform, as Anne-Marie and the Vernon guys are saying. What's happening with rail and the way the models are going forward. And I think for us, looking to the future, what we want for somewhere like Glasgow City region in the west of Scotland, modern European city region which stands up with the best across its area, and we need a transport system that fits with that and supports that. What we can't have is change for change's sake. And one of the things that we found is we're taking forward projects like the Clyde Metro, and we're taking forward bus reform. If the initiative that we're doing needs to make that change in terms of governance or structure or devolution, let's have a conversation about it. And absolutely, I think in Scotland, the regionalisation agenda is very much on the table. Last year, the First Minister said that if the SNP get into government again after the parliamentary elections in May, they'll take forward a regionalisation bill to look at empowering regions even further. Will that include transport? Let's have that conversation. Let's see where it takes us. So I think, we will build on the best of what we can take. No disrespect to the English and Welsh guys here. We'll take the best of what you've done down here. We'll take the lessons from our previous experience in Strathclyde. But it will be built for those modern projects that we're working on. And back to either Vernon or Alex said, really, really important in all of this is we're discussing it in governance and etc. You need to keep the passenger at the heart. We need to make sure that the communities, whether they're the rural areas, Strathclyde's full of them, towns and villages really, really struggling with transport. It's not just the big urban areas. We need to make sure that we're doing that. So we've got no change for change's sake. Clear reasons for doing so, learn the lessons and learn from the best and learn for what works elsewhere. That's the thing that will drive us in Scotland.
Vernon, we heard about regionalisation in Scotland. Is Cardiff the equivalent to London for Tom Forth? Are you going to have an independence movement for Carmarthenshire?
Well, the benefits of all of this have got to fall to everybody in whatever region we're talking about. So while there's been on rail, there's been a huge amount of investment in Cardiff, Core Valley Lines. It's its own self-contained railway now, and the renewals And maintenance are coming in-house as well. It'll be fully contained, and it's performing. I'm trying to find a bit of wood at 90-odd% plus reliability. And we want to repeat the trick around Wales. There's a huge amount of investment going into North Wales. And to your earlier point, or maybe it was Ben, about the connections regionally, I keep stressing that we have to look at this pan-regionally as well as sorting out our own backyards, as we've been discussing here. But if you look at North Wales, Liverpool City region, Manchester City region, Cheshire will have a mayor soon, Cheshire and Warrington. That's an that's a population 2/3 the size of London, with loads of new modern businesses in it. And therefore, talking about so-called cross-border, I don't think anybody really thinks about borders, but thinking in cross-border terms, we need to start connecting up those pipes as well. And I think loads of opportunity will fall out over the next several years to make those connections. So in Wales, there's a load we can do on rail. We'll do the burn stations in the south as well. We had Prime Minister down a couple of weeks ago, underwritten £14 billion worth of investment in the Welsh railways over the next several spending reviews. So we'll do stuff in the south and on bus, and actually for a fraction of the price, we will sort out the bus network as well in Wales and make sure that it serves rural areas, as indeed the B network serves rural areas here in Greater Manchester. Half of Oldham, half of Rochdale are rural, but we're putting investment in there, and you can do that if you're publicly owned, because you're not driven purely by commercial interests.
On cross-border, Alex, one of the challenges is the fact that your railway geography and your business unit geography within GBR won't line up naturally with the regions of strategic authorities and combined authorities. And, going back to Vernon's time at TfL, the London Overground has only reached a fraction of stations in Greater London because they could never do a deal about the fact that the trains don't start in Greater London, even if they only start relatively small distances over the border. So there's 20 years of not solving that problem just in London. How does GBR think about the fact that it's got to provide democratic accountability to strategic and combined authorities that generally won't have any meaningful overlap with the geography by which GBR organises itself?
So, I mean, it's never going to be perfect, is it? Because currently the railways are organised radially out from London. And we were discussing earlier that, services like Thameslink and the Elizabeth line cut across that railway geography. But one of the primary benefits of Great British Railways is bringing track and train together. And people sometimes criticise infrastructure managers for not being customer focused enough. Well, 35 years ago, we disconnected them from the customer. So it's not a puzzle, is it, as to why they might not be as customer focused as we would like. And therefore, reuniting track and train is critical because it connects all the people who are managing the infrastructure back with the customer, which is going to be absolutely important. One of the ways we're going to square this circle is by GBR being highly devolved. So it doesn't matter what flavour of mayoral partnership you have a voice in your local railway. And if those local railway leaders share the passion for service, as the mayors do, which they will, then that creates this alignment. So, I mean, you talked about Scotland there, where, of course, Transport Scotland, based largely in Edinburgh, 40 miles away from Glasgow. I mean, I think, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, we shouldn't obsess around powers and responsibilities and devolution settlements. We should obsess about outcomes. And actually, Glasgow has a brilliant rail network. It's very reliable. It's the largest outside London. Customer satisfaction is really high, even though it's managed by some people 40 miles away. So if we obsess about outcomes rather than structures and powers and process, I think we get to the right place, which is about a world-class transport system to help drive jobs, growth, housing, and tackle, national inequality, for example.
Question for anyone who wants to comment on it. How do we think about, in that context, the balance between consistency and local accountability and local decision making, because in a world where we focus on outcomes, different places will prioritise different outcomes, they will achieve different things. Inevitably then the papers write about the postcode lottery because things are different in different places, but if you try and achieve sameness everywhere, you make it much harder for local devolved leaders to have conversations with local combined authorities or strategic authorities and agree the things that are important to them. Any comments on the sort of the trade-off between consistency and sameness? Yes, Andrew.
I think the Green Book review published last month gives us quite a lot of encouragement in this area in the move towards more place-based decision-making and place-based business cases. And I think that's what, in the Transport East Partnership, we've been asking for quite a long time. Greater weighting of the outcomes and aspirations of place represented in the programmes of national agencies in that place, and an ability for that decision-making to be much more engaged. And I'll probably include both National Highways and the rail industry in that respect. If you look at the DfT's expenditure in the East, most of it is actually in either the strategic road or the strategic rail budget, not the local authority budget. And so our politicians are very keen for a relationship of a more formal nature with GBR and National Highways to be able to draw down more on that and have a greater say on that funding and ensure it aligns with the other infrastructure investment. Because there's actually a win-win here. I mean, not only are we having transport investment, we've recently been developing through NESO the East of England Energy Partnership. So how does a transmission network? And the aim here is how do we align these to have the best possible range of benefits from the investments that's coming in, and that comes down to it has to be done through a place-based approach.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, so I think it's really important for places to have a place-based identity. I think it drives cohesion, it drives social cohesion, it drives better outcomes. It's no surprise that most people following Vernon and the B network, and obviously the Roundel in London, have chosen a brand for their networks, for their integration networks, with the Weaver network, whether it be the B network and whatever SPT's network is going to be called when it's integrated. So I think it's important that you have that integrated view and solution at a place-based level. However, there will always need to be a set of minimum standards to ensure consistency. This has been proven. I've worked on many, for my sins, digital schemes in the transport space, where we've tried to bring together disparate, discrete systems. The commercial models aren't consistent, the technology models aren't consistent, the operating models aren't consistent, and after 3 years of lots of tears spent, we don't actually end up in the result we want. So I think there probably has to be some form of in standards and also a sort of de minimis vision baseline of what we want to achieve. Whether people go beyond that, how they tailor that for their own place-based schemes is absolutely fine, but you can't have a ticketing scheme that starts in London and doesn't work in Manchester if you're trying to connect the islands and the bridges.
Anne-Marie, how would you think about that if you were doing bus franchising in Manchester again? Because you had the luxury of going first, and now everyone else is closing in on you around you.
It's really interesting because I'm giving a bit of support to Cheshire West and Chester, which is interesting because they're kind of surrounded by franchises, around them, and so for me, I think, we were first, and we need to think about kind of where our connect. I mean, anyone who comes down the M602 knows we need to be talking to each other around congestion into Manchester and how we connect. We don't just look at Greater Manchester; we look beyond that. And I think the key for me is, specifically around bus reform. I think everyone's taken the levers in some way, shape, or form of more control. Okay, so each of the authorities, whether it's through Enhanced Partnership Plus or any other different variation of model all the way up to full franchising, are taking the levers. And once we've got a set of, everyone's got levers to put in, consistent standards, then we can start to really talk to each other and start to look at it as a pan-regional perspective. I think if we remain kind of in this juxtaposition of deregulate and none, that makes it more difficult. But I definitely agree with Ben around you don't have to be uniform in that. We were talking last night about, does this matter up north as more than it does down south? And I don't want to bring the north-south divide in, but yeah, we are regionally very we've got a great character. Whether you go from Liverpool to Manchester, we're different. very different, and we have our own kind of passion for our areas. So I think bringing them standards in by taking control of the levers is essential, and then we can start between each area, start to talk to each other, and each region start to talk and bring them standards in and make sure we have one customer proposition. But I would hate to lose, you know, the personality of each region, which is very clearly coming across depending on which area you're in. Although we do seem to have a very yellow going from, seems to be the theme at the moment, but let's see what happens next.
In a minute, I'll come to to you guys. So if you've got any questions or comments you'd like to make to the panel, then do think about that now. Question probably mainly for either Vernon or Alex. Devolution on rail has up till now meant a pretty defined model, and it's the model used by London Overground, by Elizabeth Line, by Merseyrail, and it involves the public authority taking over the management and contracting of a dedicated franchise. That's not how what we would have called devolution, had the word existed, worked back in the PTE days. Do you envisage different models of devolution in rail world as we go forward, and what might some of those look like?
Well, I mean, Great British Railways will be about 75% of the railway. So not Wales, not Scotland, not London, not open access, not freight. And how the devolved countries or regions choose to manage their railways up to them, of course. Great British Railways will be highly devolved. It will have a passion for service, and we will have a duty to work with the mayoral partnerships. And as we set out in the urban transport group document, this is a how-to guide. This is how the mayoral partnerships can work with Great British Railways on delivering fabulous rail services, often in a place-based way, integrated with other parts of the transport network. So you talked about the bridges and the islands. I mean, so for example, one common standard might be in Britain, you can travel around the country and use your phone as a ticket. That's a common standard for me. And I found out the other day that I could use my phone on Metrolink. And as a result, I'll use it more often. Because we're all about growing the size of the overall public transport market. Because as Vernon says, if we're going to support growth and tackle this regional inequality that we see across our nation, we're going to need to support that growth, both from a societal and an economic perspective. I think sometimes it's easy to overly obsess with, you know, structures. Actually, a lot of this is around behaviour. So, you know, if you looked at the way the rail industry managed the closure of the railway between Manchester Piccadilly and Stockport recently, that was done in partnership with the good folk at Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we got really great feedback. You know, it's not an easy decision to close a railway like that for such a long period of time, but if you get the behaviours right, that's half of the battle.
The only thing I'd say is a lot of us have obsessed over the bill and everything, but the bill is an enabling piece of legislation, and everything needs to be sorted out with the bill through memorandum of understanding and all the rest of it. The one thing, absolutely no one doubts the disposition of this government or Alex and his team or actually anybody in the railways industry, but the have regard to language doesn't really give you the certainty that you might need to withstand political cycles. So I think while it is absolutely true that all of this, like most things in life, it boils down to relationships and having common purpose, we do need to make sure that those agreements and the guidance and all the rest of it that will surround the bill has teeth, and that it enables the devolved areas to actually have a say, a genuine say. So there is no, to have a common integrated fare structure, the Mayor of Greater Manchester needs a say on what the daily fare cap's going to be, including rail journeys. You can't be told what that is. But I think we can work all this stuff through.
I mean, there used to be over 15 fares between Manchester Piccadilly and Stockport.
It's been brilliant.
Does anyone think that's a sensible idea? And now there's 2. Sorry, you've sparked my enthusiasm. and at a stroke,
it's improved in the passenger's perception, the level of service, because you no longer have to wait for the right train to turn up. You don't have to wait for the Transport for Wales or the Northern or the Transpennine. You just get on one, the first one that's going to the airport.
Radical idea.
Well, who would have thought?
Brilliant. Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience? Yes, just here.
Thank you. One thing that is running through my mind is that there's a capacity and capability dimension here that doesn't seem to be being mentioned. I spent my career in PTEs in Strathclyde and in West Yorkshire, and we had fairly strong teams. They related well to the British Railways teams, and things got done. We're looking, for example, at areas like the East Midlands, where there's not the strong tradition of having a significant transport planning or analysis capability. How do we envisage, and perhaps this is one which Transport East might like to comment on, how do we envisage that we can set up equal partnerships if we haven't got the relevant capabilities and skills?
Okay, so Andrew, comment on how you will build those capabilities, and then Anne-Marie on how you did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This was one of the 5 points we made to Treasury as Transport East as part of the spending review. And it was as a result of our local authorities telling us exactly what you've just said, the ability to deliver transport, and indeed the money that they receive, spend it effectively, is largely reliant on capacity and capability, and all of our local authorities said that. And so that is a key part, I think, both of the local government reform conversations that are happening at the minute. A lot of that conversation is around how you build capacity within the most effective and most efficient set of reformed local authorities. And then on top of that, the other layer is the mayoral county combined authority as well. And the conversations that they're having with MHCLG around capacity funding have really focused on this issue, is that you can't set these things up without that in place. And ideally, as much of that from within the region as possible, but also having good relationships with the market to be able to provide that quickly when provided. But reassured, it was one of the 5 things we said to Treasury, and it's been a key part of the conversations that our region's having with government.
Anne-Marie, with the first place and the first mode to do devolution, what was building up the capability like, and how did you do it?
I think, one, you've got to recognise that it's not just the outward-facing element of this. And there is a danger, like, you know, we all love the buses and the trains, but actually, if we're really going to make this work, we've got to look at our organisation's ability to deliver the service that we're taking control of. And that starts, I think I said before, from starting where you currently are and assessing that. And one of the things we did in Manchester is we looked at all the services that we would then, not bus services, I mean the physical, you know, activities that we would be doing, and looking at the services, whether that would be providing customer travel information, for example, what we will be accountable for, and assessing what our capability is in the organisation now and where it needs to be, and then going through a refine and operating model to understand what we need to bring in to the organisation in terms of skills and capability, what technology we need to bring in, because it's not, you know, skills and capability is, you know, and resources and capacity is not just about people, it's also about assets and technology. So we went through a real process of understanding where we needed to enhance our skills, capability, technology and data in the organisation, with a growth plan to get there. And through tranche 1, tranche 2 and tranche 3, we tried to mature that through the 3 tranches. It wasn't all there for day 1, and it still isn't all there. It's still got, you know, still got to mature all the way. I think moving on from Manchester, I think where we are at the moment is really exciting, and you know, even just looking at interchange is brilliant. But everyone's going at this at a similar time, and that is creating, obviously, a challenge around how do we share the resources and how do we make sure, and the knowledge, and how do we make sure, you know, some of the rural areas are not locked out because the urban areas are taking the knowledge and the control, the information. So I think, you know, the GBR element's really interesting, that we've got kind of central focus around what we need to do and standards, so that skills is a little bit centralised without all the powers being centralised. So I think, specifically around buses, we need to get into that model of a knowledge bank. I think that will be helpful. And probably the final thing I'll say is authorities, as much as, I hate to say this on a KPMG stage, but as much as authorities do need to rely on support from outside parties, and I am one now, we do also really need to focus on building capabilities internally, because we've got to have that knowledge within the organisations. Not only got to have that knowledge in the organisation to deliver consistent services day in, day out, but we've also got to have that knowledge, because if we transport is an enabler for growth, isn't it? And if we truly mean that, then we've got to develop capabilities and create jobs from it in our own industry, not just creating jobs because transport creates jobs outwards. And we've got a huge moment in time with the transformation that we're going through, both rail and bus, to make a difference into our own organisations and growing and bringing on jobs as well. I'm not from a transport background, funnily enough. I entered it when I took on the bus reform programme or the bus franchising programme. So it doesn't always have to come from people who have 20 years of transport experience. Actually, it's not a bad thing to bring people in who've come from different industries and seen how things work differently. So I think we can build the immediate capability and capacity looking outward to different industries as well. And then we should be looking to grow it through our youth and our universities. If we can push this down through them, there's opportunities to kind of bring the youth element along with us as well on the journey.
Thank you. I invite Ben to comment. Also, who wants to speak next, put your hand up so we can bring the mic to you while Ben's talking.
So I'm actually going to fundamentally agree with you. Okay. As a consultant for 20 years now in the sector, success for us should be when we've upskilled and left our clients in a way to be able to deal with this themselves. And actually, in West Yorkshire, as you know, we're doing that today, and we have a capability development programme for West Yorkshire Combined Authorities technology team, so that they upskill and are able to run this without us come April next year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think there's the other thing I wanted to point out, sort of raise on this point, the operating model, the capabilities, to the gentleman's point here, that's definitely a really important point, upskilling and getting the right people, process and technologies in place. These reform programs will also require a change of governance as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you really want to deliver a successful bus network and get more bums on seats, reduce your peak vehicle requirement, all the things I said earlier, you're going to have to evolve the relationship of the combined authority with the local highways authorities. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to get a new governance model, or certainly an evolved governance model in place. Otherwise, all the great improvements you're trying to make in a customer proposition, if those aren't enabled by the actual network, you'll never be able to deliver that growth and that performance.
There may be the third consultant on the stage to say I also strongly agree. I think one of the strengths of EFL over the years has been that it has in-house a lot of skills that many other organisations buy in, and it makes a difference. Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra and I'm from Siemens Mobility. My question's referring to light rail, actually. So last year we had a big spending review for mass transit, about 15 billion from the government. That includes bus and light rail, and we're already seeing some projects being delayed and moved. And I feel like that there is this excitement of a light rail, and I fear that we might miss on it if we keep delaying projects. So I just want to understand your view on that, obviously, on this excitement of a light rail, and what can we do more to make sure we deploy them fast so that more cities can have more light rail in their cities.
Anyone want to comment on trams and light rail? Why we can't build trams in this country?
Well, I suppose it's not necessarily just a question, your direct question on trams, but I think there's a question for us about delivery, isn't there? And delivery of capital programs. And it's an area where we've struggled. I think the opportunity that we've got, I think Ben's point on highways is really interesting, because if you think about the bus network, it's not just the buses and the number of buses you fire out from the depot, it's how quickly they go and the journey time reliability, and that requires bus lanes, it requires all sorts of interventions to get that stuff done. If you're running a tram network, that's going to run across the road surface, so probably. That needs to be thought about as well. But I think there must be mixed models for the way in which we get big infrastructure done. And I'm starting to see, if I think about Wales, the Core Valley Lines has been done by Transport for Wales. And that is it's not a light rail system, but it's got tram trains running on it in effect. And that's all been done locally. And had it not been for COVID, I think that would have come in probably under budget. It was the project prolongation that gave us some challenges. So it's all doable. And I think we just have to have, I'm sure Alex would, Network Rail don't necessarily do all of the interventions on the railway now. And if I think of Cardiff Central, Transport for Wales would do the work to upgrade Cardiff Central. So I'm not really answering your question, but I think there is a mixed model for the way in which we get stuff done, which doesn't necessarily follow what we've traditionally done.
Alex?
So my strong view is you need a long-term plan, because stop-start is not an effective way to deliver major transport infrastructure. And I'm not a major projects expert. I have delivered capital stuff in my railway career. But the textbooks would say you have to think slow and act fast, not get a 4-year spending review and get spades in the ground as fast as you can in case the money disappears. Yeah? So having a long-term plan is critical. And that's why, for example, here in Manchester, we're in Manchester, so we're talking about Manchester a lot. The Combined Authority is consulting on a transport vision to 2050. And no doubt the outcome of that will be some things you want to do. And one of the things anyone should do is try and smooth that. So whether you look at the kilometres of electrification per year we've delivered in England, whether you look at the way we order rolling stock, and you look at those graphs, they make no sense. And there are massive opportunities for Great British Railways, a publicly owned organisation, to make sure we get the delivery localised, but actually for things like trains, we procure them in a much more strategic and sensible way to derive value for the passenger and the taxpayer. And there's some push and pull factors here. We want better value from the rail industry, but also we've got 4 assembly facilities in the UK, which we'd like to keep open. And to keep them open, you have to give them regular work, not feast and famine, which is what we've given them for the last 10 years. So there's massive opportunity here by being more strategic. And of course, in railways, we've had 30 years of short-termism, privatisation, and fragmentation. And one of the great benefits of public ownership is we can think longer term.
Ben?
So I think there's a really interesting, probably pointing at West Yorkshire as well at the
I
tram.
just don't want to make sure we miss out on an opportunity.
So we have this weird parody. I'll go back to the Green Book piece here at the moment of we need each scheme, Bruce and I have talked about this quite a lot recently, need each scheme, each investment to stand on its own 2 feet. So you want a tram scheme, that business case has to stand on its own 2 feet. You want a bus reform scheme, that has to stand on its own 2 feet. You want rail devolution. The reality of this is that the whole thing is an integrated network. And you need a place-based business case that draws all of that together and looks at the most optimum solution for what you're trying to achieve. West Yorkshire is an interesting case because you potentially, with rail devolution, you may not need some of the tram network. And with bus reform, you could replace it with some buses. Vice versa, you might choose to use trams instead of buses in some of the parts of the network. But to do that, you've got to bring everything together, and the same is true of Clyde Metro and bus reform in Glasgow, which obviously Bruce is going to comment on in a second. So I think that there has to be a long-term commitment. Alex is absolutely spot on, to a place-based vision that you can commit to that says this is our integrated transport network, not just try and get every single scheme to stand up in its own right.
Two quick plugs, and one after this. The next session is on place-based planning, so do stay and listen to that, where we'll get into exactly those issues. Secondly, selfishly, a plug from me for a report I've written, which is being published next week by myself, RAC Foundation, Combining for Better Transport and Create Streets, when we took a bunch of parliamentarians and policymakers to France to see how they build trams and what lessons they learnt from that. So watch out for that one next week. Bruce, did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, thanks. And it's an excellent question. I think there is a general frustration, I think, with the level of delivery that people see now compared with what they perceived to happen in the past. And that's something that our generation has to kind of live up to and deal with. But I think it's really important just now, looking at the conference today, hearing everybody around the table and hearing Alex point there about having the plans in place. We've got the plans. We've all got some really good projects that we're working on around the country at the moment. And in fact, I think in 10 to 15 years' time, if we get it right, this will be viewed as a kind of golden time in terms of the way that sustainable transport in Britain developed. But we need to get the delivery right. There is absolutely no point in having the best business case sitting on the shelf if we're not delivering it properly, doing the funding correctly, adopting the place-based approach. We need to make that work. And surely, I think from the thing that I've found over the last couple of days here is the amount I'm learning from others. Hopefully they're learning from us. We're all learning together. And I mean that across not just the urban transport group, public sector authorities. And again, Ben and I talk about this all the time. The public and private sector need to find new ways of working, less transactional, much more partnership focused, whether it's bus franchising, whether it's transport planning, project development. I think that will be absolutely key to that accelerated delivery. And that's something that I think, hopefully, the scale of the projects that we're all talking about should hopefully force our hands in taking those forward. And I absolutely hear what you're saying about, whether focus on light rail and perhaps taking our eye away from other things. It's the right mode for the right place, and not lose sight of that. And where there are appropriate justifications to bring in heavy rail, then we most certainly look at that. Where tram, whatever else is the appropriate one, let's do it. So I think through all of those things, that accelerated delivery, which in other sectors seems to come naturally, we can do within the sustainable transport sector too.
Anne-Marie.
So my background, I'm basically a project manager at the nuts and bolts of it. I've been doing it a long time, and I have worked in other sectors, and I can feel the frustration a little bit. I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I think project managers often get something that is not fully fleshed out as a set of clear understanding and requirements change. So I think that place-based, or I would call in project delivery terms, a portfolio approach. So I know it's place and in this particular, but looking at it as a whole set, it's a group of activities and a group of delivery that deliver an overall outcome. I think it's really important. The other thing is we have a vision and we have a very clear outcome of what we want. Transport projects take inevitably quite a significant time. So what you think you want right now will inevitably slightly evolve as you go through. And I think we have to accept that level of uncertainty, and we're not very good at it. I was on a grey space talk yesterday, and we're not great with uncertainty as human beings. So we like to know we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's before we crack on. And I think we have to recognise that isn't always going to be the case, because some of these things take a long time. So beyond the safety element, which has to be certain, I think we have to accept a level of iteration as we go through, and we need to start rather than waiting for everything to be clear, because not everything is clear at the outset. And I think we also have to, and not many people like this say, we have to accept that we won't always achieve 100%. And we often wrap our feet in concrete because we're waiting to attain that 100%. Passengers don't expect 100%, but they want change, and they get frustrated by a lack of change. And having done this in many different industries, one of the worst things you can do is wait to have everything perfect and all the lights perfect and all the weather perfect before you get going. The best thing to do is start, and you will deliver. And when you deliver, people accept a level of continuous improvement, but they want to see change. So you just have to kind of take the concrete boots off a little bit and go, really.
Alex, can I ask you one question that's been niggling me from one of your answers? I just want to push you a bit on it. Fine.
Just because I didn't agree with you.
Exactly, entirely, absolutely. You mentioned the importance of focusing on outcomes, and that feels really sensible. Who decides what the outcomes are? So to give you a made-up example, I want to make it quite clear this is a made-up example. Let's imagine that Claire Ward decided she wanted an East Midlands metro connecting Nottingham and Derby at high frequency, and that was core to her place-based vision. And she came to GBR with that requirement. GBR's core outcome metric is reliability, and they're worried this would make the trains less reliable. And GBR's key commercial imperative is to keep the Sheffield to London trains running with high yields, high frequency, and on time. How would it be decided what the outcome to measure is?
So, the first thing to say is this is not all about pouring the concrete, is it? It's also about making sure the existing service is boringly reliable and is joined up with the local transport system, wherever that is. And as we've said, railways exist for a purpose, and the purpose is not railways. And this is why having a long-term rail strategy is so important, and the industry and government is writing one. And in the documentation, which we published in December, or the Department for Transport published, it sets out, here are the 5 things we want the railway to focus on: customers, finances, economic growth, tackling regional inequality, and environment. And so when you have those 5, as we would probably not argue with those objectives, would we, about what we want a transport system to do, then that creates the alignment between the people who are running the system and local stakeholders, mayoral partnerships, what have you. So I think, by reconnecting everyone in the railway ecosystem with the customer, which we disconnected 30-odd years ago, then things like these will be seen as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Fantastic, thank you. We're very nearly out of time. In fact, we are out of time. I'm just going to very quickly attempt to summarise and then tell me on the panel anything I get wrong. I think the key things we heard were, 1, an absolute focus on outcomes for place-based outcomes, but also outcomes for customers. 2, that the mechanisms are essential, but it's not just down to mechanisms. There's also a huge amount of the importance of human relationships, conversations, and discussion. The capability gap is real and needs to be filled, and everyone needs to start filling that slowly. 4, that you need to be planning slowly and then delivering fast, but we have to focus on the planning slowly, the strategic planning phase, and making sure there's that degree of cross-industry alignment. Anything I got wrong there or anything I've missed?
Nope.
No, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Well done.